This episode of the Helping Healing Humor podcast is brought to you in partnership with ministryleague.com. We would love for more people to discover this show, so please rate and review us on iTunes or your podcast provider. Feel free to share on your social media and subscribe at benandtravis.com for the free ebook, 28 Days of Focused Living. Welcome back to the Helping Healing and Humor podcast with Ben and Travis. And of course, I'm Ben, and my partner in crime, Travis Creasy, is with us. How you doing, Travis?
I'm doing all right. You guys all right tonight?
We are doing well. And of course, as we mentioned last time, or maybe another time, we have Will Mahan with us. He's always riding along with us, or a lot of times riding along with us. So how you doing, Will?
I'm doing really well, Ben. Excited to be here. Excited to hear some good stuff.
Well, I think you are going to hear some good stuff today because we have with us a good friend of ours, a good fellow minister, and in Michael Whitworth. We are glad to have him with us. He's the owner of Start to Finish, a web media and book publishing company, author of some really awesome books. I've read several of them, the Epic of God, The Derision of Heaven. He's over 12 years experience in full-time preaching and ministry. So he's got a lot of stuff that we're going to pick his brain about tonight. And we're just excited. He is a graduate from Freed-Hardeman University. He's an instructor of teaching Rocket, teaching seminar for Bible classes, and conducts those about 60 churches nationally and internationally each year. And that's pretty huge. Obviously, the corona has affected that in some ways, as it has a lot of people. He's recently launched something we're going to get him to talk about in a little bit, the Life in the Shadow of Death, a biblical and experiential a seminar in grief. Of course, he has his family, Sarah, and 4 children, Daniel, Audrey, Michaela, and Autumn. I get Michaela, that's correct. Did I get that?
Yeah.
I get that name right. So, of course, in his spare time, as he sent to us, he enjoys drinking coffee, and we enjoy that occasionally as well. Sports, as he's been coveting Travis's sports memorabilia behind him in our video segment of this, and spending time with his awesome family. So, Michael Whitworth, welcome, man.
Hey, it's good to be here. Thank y'all for having me.
Yes, sir. We are
so good to see you. So good to see you.
Hey, you too. I was thinking today in preparation for this, I first knew y'all at Maywood because I'm about 5-6 years younger than y'all are, but I first remember y'all at Maywood when y'all were in high school. Ben, I think was probably either junior or senior. And Travis, you still look like you're in high school. I don't know what happened to Ben, but
what's that?
That's why I've got the beard.
Man.
That's why I've got the beard.
No, so with that connection, we go back a ways.
Yeah,
yes,
and what I remember about Michael growing up was you always every year singing a Ray Stevens song at Maywood. And that was always, Ray Stevens is one of my favorites. So, always got to enjoy that.
Yeah, I was humming Mississippi Squirrel Revival to myself just last week.
That's awesome. Well, as I say to anyone who put up with me when I was in high school and growing up, God bless you, because, I'm a twerp now, but it was like 10 times worse then. So thank you for still being my friend.
I concur. And there's a cool story too. I was talking to my wife, Kenya, that you probably may be aware of, Michael. I don't know, but your mom and dad were really instrumental in my wife and her family getting back into church and their relationship with God. They had kind of been away for a while. I think they visited at North Carolina when your dad was preaching there. Yep. And your dad made a visit to them. And then I think your mom probably was more behind inviting them over to eat. And they
a long time ago.
Yeah, they reached out to them. And my wife, went to Freed-Hardeman as a result of all that. We met there. We married, have 5 kids. So, I have your family to thank for some of that. So I think that's a pretty cool story.
Yep.
Well, as our podcast is about helping healing humor, we have always, since the beginning of this podcast, we have sort of asked about seasons in people's lives that have been somewhat challenging, difficult, and we've shared some of our stories. And of course, Michael, we wanted to have you on to talk about this. Obviously, you're doing this seminar now, but there's some background to you doing this seminar as well. So we just wanted to ask you about kind of, tell us about that season in your faith and your life that was a little more challenging.
Well, it all started about 16 years ago. Up until my junior year at Freed-Hardeman, nothing bad had ever happened to me. I, never had to go through anything tough. Tough times were the Cowboys going, 5-11, 3 straight years, or something like that. But early in my junior year at Freed-Hardeman, in fact, it'll be 16 years this September. My dad passed away very suddenly. He was electrocuted in a home accident. He was only 44 years old. I preached my father's funeral at 19, and nobody prepared me to do that. I had a good education growing up, but they did not prepare me to do that. And obviously, it was very devastating for my family to lose him suddenly like that. But as I began to work through some of the grief, I came to realize that everybody has one tough thing they have to go through in life. I think we'd agree with that. Everybody's got one tough thing. Yeah. For some, it's when they're a kid, maybe childhood leukemia. For others, it's when they're middle-aged, divorce, bankruptcy. For others, it's when they're older, cancer. But everybody's got one tough thing that happens to them. And maybe I'm lucky to get mine out of the way sooner than later. And look out, life, Michael Whitworth's coming. I thought that for a long time. But then 5 years in December, my wife and I, our oldest, our son Daniel, unexpectedly passed away in the middle of the night. He was almost 3 years old, nothing wrong with him whatsoever. To this day, we have no really idea what happened to him. And especially in the wake of that loss, which, losing a parent, losing a child are two completely different things. I tell people you're never ready to lose your parents. But as terrible and tragic as that is, whether they're, 44 or 84 or whatever, you do have that sense within you that is the natural order of things. You're supposed to bury your parents. Whereas, I never expected to preach the funeral for my son ever. And so, because of that, for whatever reason, the Lord has asked me to walk through the valley of the shadow of death, not once, but twice in my short life. I'm just 35. Because of that, I've tried to learn more about grief and the grief process and what happens to us as a part of the grief process, especially because of my background in church. I'm a third generation preacher and have been in the church all my life, been intimately connected because of my dad's ministry, intimately connected with church world. I've tried to figure out some of the things that we're doing right in church world related to grief, but then also tried to point to and uncover a lot of things that we're doing wrong. Yeah. Two major influences on my life are, some of our mutual friends, Ron and Don Williams. They've done a lot of grief counseling, grief seminars, etc. But when I was thinking about putting my seminar together, I talked with Don at the Freed-Hardeman lectures, and I just asked him point blank, one, I'd want your blessing on this, because I don't want y'all to feel like I'm trying to, steal your audience. Right. But two, what do you think I can bring to the table that you cannot? And he almost immediately said your experience. Yeah. He talked about how they couldn't quite come at it free. They'd had loss, but losing a father and a son so early in life, he said, you're going to be able to bring an experience and a perspective that a lot of people don't have. And that really, I really chewed on that, because I, by nature, want to hear from the expert. Ron and Don are experts. I want to hear what they have to say on this subject. But in the world that we're living in, a lot more people want to hear from someone who has experienced it, who isn't necessarily an expert, but they can talk from the personal side of things. And I found that in this space, that there's been an incredible response to that. I tell people, to borrow the phrase from C.S. Lewis, I was brought into this kicking and screaming. I did not set it out to do grief seminars. I call these grief literacy seminars instead of just grief recovery, because they're for more people than just those who have recently lost loved ones.
Sure.
The quote that I use in promotion, I came across it in a book that simply said, "We live in a grief illiterate society," and that is absolutely the case. And so with this seminar, I try to not only help people understand the emotions of grief, but also know what they can and can't say, what they can and can't do. And
That's
then
huge.
particularly some things they need to know about when it comes to what I call unconventional grief, whether it be miscarriage, losing a child to unfaithfulness to the Lord, divorce, suicide, job loss. Some of the things that we grieve in life, but they're not that nice, cut and dry, go to the funeral home, hug their neck, shake their hand, and that sort of thing. So I put this seminar together, been doing it for a little over a year now. Back in December, we released the book. It's just the seminar in book form, Life in the Shadow of Death, as well.
Yeah.
Well, I'll say this. I don't know that I've said this on the podcast before, but I can remember, I think you may have even been on vacation and you did a Facebook Live, maybe even from the beach. And that was really the first inclination that I had. And I think that was predating I'm sure it was my diagnosis. And that was kind of the first inclination of, there really needs to be information as simple as do's and don'ts. And we get into that. I hope we get into that before we wrap up our conversation. But yeah, any minister, I think, worth their salt would love a list of anything of do's and don'ts. Don't say this, don't do that. So That's huge. That's a great service to anybody who, has experienced it, gone through it, but also, as we say here on the podcast, people who love those people who are going through it.
Well, one of the things that became very clear to me, and I find this very intriguing, ironic, etc. You think about the things that parents teach their children over the course of their childhood. Look both ways before you cross the street. Don't talk to strangers. Brush your teeth. all the things that we teach our kids. The important things to set them up to do well in life. I had great parents, but and they didn't shield me from funeral homes or cemeteries, but at the same time, I don't think I was ever explicitly taught how to grieve and what emotion is going to be like. And my point in that is only this: you don't get to a point in life where we formally educate you on how to grieve properly. That never happens.
Yeah.
You have to wait until you have to go through it. And even after you've gone through it, doesn't mean that you're equipped to help someone else grieve, because grief, any expert will tell you, grief is completely different from one person to the next.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the thing that you said. I'm not an expert, and maybe you're not, but I think experience makes experts sometimes. It's not, you can do a lot of book study, and I've done that with counseling, but there's still scenarios I don't feel as comfortable with as somebody who's gone through them and somebody who's experienced them. And I know there's a lot of different griefs and there's a lot of different difficult times, but in my own perspective, I think losing a child and losing a parent has to be up there as the two, but it's a spectrum, but just, those two things. And you have that experience, you've walked through that. And so, we talk about with our groups that Will helps me with, and I've done some with Lonnie, is, anytime you go through something, now you have the experience to help someone else through it. And that's so huge for what you're doing. And really what we're trying to do with this podcast is helping people, help other people, or helping people who are going through things, because we've been through some things. And so having different people on who've had different experiences, and we're just really excited and thankful that you've come on to help us with that. And with that question, you've kind of shared with us the story, we want to look at kind of God's part in this. How did you sort of see God show up in this time in your life?
You see him show up, and you see him show up in the smallest of ways. You find, especially, this is probably the biggest way I noticed him, is long before he put people in my life who were going to make sure that I could make it. I certainly think about my wife. She's been my rock through all of this. When I've been weak, she's been strong, and for the 30 minutes that she's been weak, I've been strong. I think about that. I think about again some more of our friends there in Florence. Ben, I don't know if you know this or not, but I was barely born, and Dr. Tim Ashley was working in the hospital in Morton, Mississippi, on the weekends. He was finishing up his residency, I think, in Jackson. He came to church one Sunday. He and my dad really hit it off. My dad was preaching there, and he goes from sleeping in like a closet at the hospital to sleeping on like our couch, I think. And then he moved his family to Morton. And then about 4 years later, he moved them to Florence, and they've been there ever since. But the Ashleys have been a part of my life literally for all of my life, maybe shy a few weeks, but they have been a huge part of my grief journey. And I could go on with more stories, Jeff Jenkins, others. I look back and I see God putting people in my life, and they ended up being the people that helped me most. It's a reminder that when God leads us into the valley of the shadow of death, he's actually gone before us, and he has prepared a way. And that gives us confidence that, I think sometimes in tragedy, we try to defend God's reputation at the expense of his sovereignty, and you can't do that.
Wow. Yeah.
I talk about this in my book, Bethlehem Road, which is about the book of Ruth. I wrote that book before my son died, but after my dad, and so I'm reflecting on my dad's death. I would rather serve a God who at times doesn't make sense to me, and at times I feel like he's being unfair or mean, but I'm always convinced that he's in complete and utter sovereign control. I would rather serve that God than a God who's a really nice old man, and sometimes bad things happen because it's kind of like he's the goalie in soccer and a ball just slipped past him into the net. Oops. I don't want any part of that God. I don't want any part of that God. And there may be a scripture that I'm missing, but nowhere are we ever allowed to question his sovereignty. Question his goodness, his love. Job does plenty of that, but when Job kind of starts stepping into, I could do a better job of God than you can, that's when the whirlwind comes down. And so I learned a lot about God's nature. And it takes a lot of faith to believe that he's in complete control when your world's been completely shattered. But I've also seen him remain faithful to me when I wasn't very faithful to him. I tell people, even now, almost 5 years later, a lot of Sundays, God and I are on good terms. I love him, he loves me. I love worshiping him. But occasionally there's that Lord's Day where God and I are like two feuding family members at Thanksgiving. We're in the same building, but we're not talking to each other. So you have that. And I believe that God respects that. He respects that emotional honesty from us. He can take anything that we can, throw in his face verbally, because he wants us to talk to him. And he, we are in a long line of Old Testament and New Testament saints who at one time or another shook their fist at heaven. And so there's a lot that you learn about yourself, and there's a lot that you learn about the Lord when you go through these experiences. But you have to be willing to look. So Ben, you hunt. Travis, you hunt.
Okay.
I
hunt good television, and I come up empty most of the time.
There you go. So I know Ben's a big hunter. So I grew up around hunters and all that, deer season especially. It's kind of interesting to me. I've never had that desire to leave a perfectly warm bed in the middle of the night to go out in the freezing cold and try to shoot a critter. I've never had that desire, and that never made any sense to me why people did that. But I am into landscape photography. And I will tell you, there have been many occasions that I have left a perfectly warm bed in the middle of the night to go out into the freezing cold and to do some shooting of my own, but just with a camera instead of a gun. And I mention that to say, if you don't show up, if you don't go out there, if you don't look, you're never going to see spectacular sunrises. You never get out of bed, you never go get in the deer stand, you're never going to see that 10, 13 point buck walking by with a big sign that says shoot me. You have to be looking if you want to see what God is doing. And in my book, Bethlehem Road, where I talk about Ruth, specifically Naomi, when she comes back to Bethlehem at the end of chapter 1, she is so bitter over the losses of her husband and then her 2 sons. She's so bitter she can't see that God has gone before her to help her in this journey, that God had ended the famine in Bethlehem, that God had brought her back so she could be with her clan, her family members. He had also provided Ruth for her. God's been providing for Naomi by virtue of his providence, but she's not looking at what God is doing, and so her focus is very narrow. Sometimes when we're so focused on ourselves and our own grief, we miss what God is actually doing in our lives in spite of our grief, or in the midst of our grief. And it takes a lot of faith and moral fortitude to keep our focus on what the Lord is doing and not our own pity party, because there's going to be enough of that. But from time to time, you got to look and see what's happening. You got to get out of bed. You got to go stand out in the cold, as tough as it is. And I promise you, you're going to see something spectacular eventually.
What do you think of when I say school night dinners? Pretty sure you didn't think healthy, effortless, or relaxed. The back-to-school season is stressful under normal circumstances. Everyone has to readjust to keeping a schedule after a couple of months of the laid-back pace of summer. This year, the adjustment period will be even bigger shock to the system, since many of us have been home for almost 5 months due to the COVID-19 school closings last spring. The readjustment to the faster pace of the daily work and school grind will be stress-inducing for everyone, and new school guidelines like mandatory face masks, temperature scan stations, and social distancing practices may make little ones even more prone to anxiety, even if they don't say it out loud. This year it will be even more important for us as parents to be attentive to our kiddos as we get back to a semi-normal routine this fall, checking in to make sure that they are faring well mentally and emotionally, and helping them process all of the changes they will be experiencing. I know what you're thinking. That's easier said than done. There are so many urgent things that have to be dealt with every evening, like cooking dinner, packing lunches, doing laundry, and homework, that it's easy for the more important things like our kids' mental and emotional health to take a back seat.
Hi, Whitney, Travis's other half here. How about a week's worth of easy weeknight dinners for your family? We've done the planning for you. As a parent, the hours between the end of the school day and bedtime are precious. During the school year, our kids spend more waking hours with their teacher than they do with us. I don't know about you, but I don't want to waste the majority of that precious time in the kitchen. But I still want to provide my family with a healthy, tasty, and budget-friendly dinner. That's why we're giving you a meal plan with a week's worth of quick and easy, almost hands-free dinners for your family, complete with a grocery list. So you can take meal planning, shopping, and cooking off your to-do list. Now you have quality time to spend with your family. You can tend to the urgent and the important things and still have a relaxed, unhurried meal at the table with your family. Go to benandtravis.com/meal plan to sign up. We will send the meal plan and grocery list straight to your inbox.
Our podcast is called Helping Healing Humor Podcast. So we do try to mix a little bit of that in there. And so we want to ask you a couple of, I guess, questions that just are a little off the subject of what we've been talking about. And then in the next episode, we'll come back to some things. What is a canceled television show that you would bring back and why?
The Office. I was a huge fan of The Office. I watch it on repeat ridiculously. And the caveat is only if they bring back Steve Carell, because after he left the show, kind of jumped the shark a little bit. But shows like The Office, shows like Seinfeld, I'm a huge Seinfeld fan. They're just a great, exploration of human nature and different personalities that you encounter in the world. Everybody that watched The Office, they're like, I know who that person is in my life, etc. when I watch these episodes, it's almost like I'm hanging out with old friends. There's a comfort there. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of The Office. I'd bring it back if Steve Carell was on board.
Yeah, I always thought the Seinfeld show was like the stupidest thing when I was a kid, and then as I got older, I was like, that's actually pretty hilarious. They did pretty well with that.
Show about nothing. All right, number next. What song is your jam that whenever you hear it, whether it's the car, there's an audience, wherever, it's your jam. You're gonna go off.
Ooh, that's a good question. I'd say it probably differs from time to time. I'm very eclectic in my musical taste. If there's one that I probably play the most over the years, and I'm talking 20 plus years, it'd probably be Toby Keith, Should Have Been a Cowboy.
Nice. That's a great image. That's a great image.
Especially since you live in Texas, right?
Yes. Well, see, and I love that song because the 1992 kind of film, the film book or whatever of the Cowboy season, they won the Super Bowl that year. The 1992 team video at the end, it had the music video of Should Have Been a Cowboy, but they had interspliced, scenes from the season. That's awesome. It was just so cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks for being with us for this episode of the Helping Healing Humor podcast. Be sure to download our free ebook, 28 Days of Focused Living, at benandtravis.com and receive all of our Helping Healing and Humor extra content directly in your inbox. We look forward to having you join us at the same Ben and Travis time, same Ben and Travis channel.